that everyone must do in order to unlock the development potential of a site. I was a planning officer for years, and so many times I got applications, and within the first 5 minutes of getting a case, you know whether or not it's going to get permission, and it often comes down to 3 very, very basic steps that you need to take just to understand whether or not it's got potential. So we'll walk through them now. The first thing is to check the planning history. This is the single and most foremost important step that you can take, and it can almost bypass the next 2 because it gives you so much insight into a site. Maybe you've thought about getting into property investment and you want to go to an auction house and you want to unlock the value of that property. You know it's there, but you just can't see it. But you don't have the money to pay consultants to investigate it for you and then to give you a response. But what if you learned the tools so that you could do the investigation for yourself, so that you could go to an auction house and you could look at 10, 20, 30, 40. You could go to any property you find on Rightmove or Zoopla, investigate the site for yourself, whether or not it's got development potential. You know, in just doing that research by yourself, you've saved yourselves 4, 5, and as the time goes on, maybe even 6 figures in consultants fees that you would have saved if you could do the research by yourself. And unfortunately, a lot of people are scared away from the property development circles just because of that element. They don't understand it, they're scared away from it, and they don't have the money they think they need to unlock the value of a site. Well, this video and the other videos that I do are going to help you unlock that value using the planning process. Now, people pay consultants to do that, but unfortunately consultants don't always get it right. They won't have the same vested interest that you do knowing your own investment. So if you learn it for yourself, you'll save yourself a lot of money, but you also save yourself time and the headache and the anxiety that comes with not knowing and having that uncertainty about the potential of that property. But this video is going to walk you through how to get planning permission by yourself. It's going to take you through the steps that you need to take before you go anywhere near the council, and then to walk you through the steps of the process so that you know if and when you apply, what happens at each stage, so that you know how long am I going to wait, who's going to look at it, what likelihood of decision am I going to get, and then hopefully by the end of it you'll walk away with a planning permission and you've unlocked the development potential of the site. So the first and most important thing before you go anywhere near the council and start throwing in applications is to do your research, and it is the number one thing that everyone must do, and so many people don't do, that everyone must do in order to unlock the development potential of a site. I was a planning officer for years, and so many times I got applications, and within the first 5 minutes of getting a case, you know whether or not it's going to get permission, and it often comes down to 3 very, very basic steps that you need to take just to understand whether or not it's got potential. So we'll walk through them now. The first thing is to check the planning history. This is the single and most foremost important step that you can take, and it can almost bypass the next 2 because it gives you so much insight into a site. So planning history is, if you type in an address into your local council's website, they will give you a list of the type of planning applications that have been submitted, approved, refused, not only for that site but also in the local area. And when you look at that information for sites, for developments that are comparable to what you want to do, or maybe you're just looking to see what type of development has been accepted in the local area, it is a treasure chest of information that so many people overlook. In there you'll find out what people have applied for, what type of developments are successful in that area, what type of developments are refused, and why. That's the most important thing, that last bit. Why were they accepted? Why were they refused? So checking the planning history of a site is essential. The second part of that, and you will find this out in the first step, is checking the site and surroundings. So what type of area are you in? Are you in a residential area? Are you in an industrial area? Are you in a commercial area? You know, is there a school nearby? Is there a nightclub nearby that might affect whatever you want to do? That's a really important step, and it is a step that every planning officer takes when they assess an application. And the next thing is either policies or constraints. So every council has policies. Some of them are quite generic, things like design, everything must be a nice design. Some councils have specific policies on things like building in your back garden. So once you've done that research, this is like I say, that is if you take anything away from this video, that research that you've done, package it up, keep it safe, because it's the thing that so many people don't do, and it will just save them so much money. So once you've got your research, you've got an understanding as to what you think is possible of a site, okay, what do you do next? How do you approach the council? What do you say? What do you do? The first and most important thing to do is, in my mind, do not go for pre-application advice, particularly if you're doing small scale stuff like extending a house or subdividing a house or doing extensions to residential. You can find out whether or not that you're going to get success for that without going anywhere near the council. So for those that don't know what pre-application is, You submit some plans to the council and you ask them for advice. You pay them a fee to give you advice, just like you would a planning consultant, but people go to the council because it gives them some level of assurance. Well, whatever they say in that advice, they can go back on. If you look at any pre-application advice that you've ever got, it will say, these are the informal views of the council. It is not binding, and it does not represent it does not represent a decision by the council. So whilst it is advice, and sometimes it can be helpful to let you know what the issues of a site are, it is not a decision, and it is not a given that you will get planning permission. And you spend a lot of time trying to get that advice. It can take months. So if you do the research well, and over time you'll get better and better at it, you do that research, you can go to the council without any pre-application advice, and you have an understanding that what type of decision you're going to get without going anywhere near pre-application advice. Now let's get into what actually happens. First of all, there are different types of applications. The main ones are householder, which is anything to do with a house, not flats. So anything to do with a house, like extensions and things like that, that goes under householder permission. Planning permission, full planning permission, is anything you want to do to a flat, and it just encompasses everything else. So if you want to do anything to a flat, it goes under full planning permission. If you want to change the use of something, if you want to do a commercial building, an industrial building, a day centre, a church, a school, anything like that, that goes under full planning permission. Then you've got permitted development. This is a huge area. It's available to so many people, particularly with houses. There's a lot you can do under permitted development, and I'll get into why. But the reason is that it gives you assurance over what you can and can't do, and there's a clear deadline, which the first two don't have. So it's a really, really important thing that you need to know and learn so that you can exercise and unlock the potential of a site without having to do going through the uncertainty of planning permission. And the last one is not overly used, but it's a very important and valuable one, is certificates. So you may have heard of the 4-year rule or the 10-year rule. Well, the 4-year rule is when someone does extensions or alterations that they never got permission for. So what they use is the certificate to prove that over 4 years ago this was done and it was true. So, and then you in the application you submit 4 years of evidence. And the same thing goes with 10 years. It's just that the 10-year rule is used for everything else. So if you want to prove a commercial unit has been in use for 10 years, that's what you need to do. The same thing goes with HMOs. So you've chosen your application, you submit it. The next thing is that it gets validated. Some councils have a validations team, or some councils have the planning officer do it. Now the point about validation is this is where you need to submit the correct stuff, and it's very important because it can slow you down. You need to submit the right plans and the right documents, otherwise the council will throw it back at you. Now every council has what's called a validations checklist, so check that against your development. If you're doing an extension to a house, the most typical ones are things like site location plan, floor plans, elevations and sections, and sometimes a contextual elevation if you're going to do something to the roof to see how it matches your neighbours. But normally those are the most important things. And now you get past the validation process. This is when an officer gets hold of it, and this is when the consultation process starts. This is true of householders and planning permission. So this is when letters get sent out to neighbours or emails to say, this development is happening, we need your views. They've got 21 days to respond to that. They can object or support. They can have more than 21 days. It's just the minimum time is that they have to have at least 21 days. This is also the time that officers consult their colleagues in specialist subjects like transport or trees. So that's a bit of the planning process that I don't think a lot of people understand. When an officer gets something, let's say there is a transport issue, a transport officer has to be spoken with, and they need to discuss the application. And if there are more issues with an application, let's say there's transport, heritage and trees, then there's 3 officers involved in that, and that's where sometimes extra time can take because not every officer gets back to that officer, the planning officer, on time. Then once they've done all this, the officer is going to want to arrange a site visit. Sometimes they'll get in touch with you to do it with you accompanied. So if they need to get access to the site, so if you're doing a rear extension and it can only be seen from the back, they'll get in contact with you or whoever's your representative to view it. More often than not, if they can see it from public views, then they will go and do that without telling you. Once they've done the validation, once they've done the consultation, once they've done the site visit, Now they can do their assessment, and this is when they make their decision. The timescales for this is, like I say, is anyone's guess. This is when it's really unclear as to what's going to happen. So councils say that you have 8 weeks, and this says in legislation that councils have 8 weeks to make a decision. But I think anyone who's been through the planning process will know that it can take a lot longer. Some people might find that with timescales, when you get near the end of the 8 weeks, this is where officers might get in touch to say, can we have some more time to make a decision? So just bear in mind that as you get closer to the end of the 8 weeks, that is when officers tend to get in touch to say, can I have more time? Or it may be, and this does happen a lot, they may not get in touch, and then 8 weeks comes, and then all of a sudden a decision is spat out without contacting you ever. That's quite common, unfortunately. Now lastly is to check the decision, whether you've been approved or whether you've been refused. Once you get your decision, it's very important that you check that the drawings are right, because once you get your decision, it's an enforceable document. Okay, so it will say description of development, rear extension, single story rear extension, and it will list some drawings. It's very important you check those drawings, because if you build not in accordance with those drawings that's on that decision notice, it's possible that enforcement department can get in touch and ask you to change it, which could be extremely costly. So check that the decision is what you are expecting in terms of the design you want. And also in the conditions, this is generally reserved for bigger schemes, but there are conditions that say before development commences, you must give us details of X. Sometimes it's cycle storage or refuse storage. You must check those, because you cannot start works like the condition says without those being discharged. The important thing to know about that is conditions have their own application process, which is just as long as the planning process. So the fewer conditions you can have, then the quicker you can actually get on site and get built and finished. So check your conditions. And then likewise with refusal, check the refusal. Importantly, check the date of decision, because that is when the clock starts for your rights of appeal. You have 6 months to appeal on full planning permission, householders 12 weeks. So just check that decision. Then you can just set a reminder in your calendar as to when you need to get your appeal in, if that's what you want to do. And then I won't go into an appeal, but if you do get refused, you do have a right of appeal, but this is immensely slow. So if you have been refused by planning, you've taken 3-4 months to get to this point, don't assume that if you go to the inspectorate, it's going to be any quicker, unfortunately. They are very, very slow at the moment. So all of this is to say, I've gone through all these steps, I've told you how you can get planning permission by yourself, but it all comes back down to that first point. If you do your research, then all of those timescales you don't need to worry about so much. If you do your research up front, you know what you can get permission for, you do your research correctly, then you can apply with some certainty that you're going to get approval, and then you've saved yourself. I mean, let's assume that you've got 3 sites. They all get refused, they all go to appeal. You'll add it up. That's talking about 6 years, right? If you do your research correctly on all 3 of them, you could save yourself years of time, thousands of pounds, and you'll walk away with a permission that maybe you want to sell or build, and you can unlock the value of your site. So that is how you get planning permission by yourself. And if you want to know more about how to master that process and get better at it for yourself so you can save thousands of pounds, somewhere on this video or a link below, there's a link you can click and you can learn more. You can get access to learn more about how to find the value of any site in the country.